how many bullets stop them. Humanitarian corridors will still work, and only time separates you from freedom. Short time. Believe in it. I believe.
Ukraine's foreign minister has accused Russia of holding 400,000 residents hostage by shelling the port city of Mariupol, despite efforts to establish a safe evacuation corridor. It's after Russia said its troops would stop firing there, along with 4 other Ukrainian cities, to let civilians evacuate. Well, Mariupol City Council says the Russian bombing has completely destroyed the city's children's hospital. In the city of Sumy, the regional governor says the evacuation continues after 5,000 civilians fled yesterday. In some other news now, a 28-year-old man has died on Ben Nevis in the Highlands. Police Scotland say it's the 6th fatality in Scotland's mountains over the last 2 weeks. Rescuers work to reach 17 people stranded on the UK's highest mountain. A 7-year-old boy has made history today by becoming the youngest person ever to present a petition to the Scottish Parliament. Callum Isted is making the case for every primary school pupil to be given a reusable water bottle. He told the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon it would help reduce plastic waste. The ancient wreck of the Endurance has been found on the bottom of the sea in Antarctica. Sir Ernest Shackleton's ship was discovered over 3,000 metres down. It's given us the first glimpse of the famous vessel since it was crushed by ice and sank on its fateful expedition in 1915. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head to Darren for this afternoon's briefing.
Thanks indeed, Rosie. 7 minutes, almost past 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. You're watching GB News, The Briefing, with me, Darren McCaffrey, on TV, online, and listening potentially on your DAB digital radio. We're going to focus today on PMQs because it focused heavily on the government's response to the rise in energy costs, with the Prime Minister facing criticism from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. It comes as it approaches 2 weeks, of course, since Russian forces moved into Ukraine, with the latest worrying news that radioactive substances could be released from Chernobyl due to a power failure. Well, let's talk about all of this and much more with the Conservative MP for Weston-super-Mare, that's John Penrose. John, thank you so much indeed for joining us. First of all, you asked a question in a Prime Minister's Question Time today. I'm not entirely sure you got a very clear answer. Just tell us what you want. You want this idea about the kind of the visas that have already been handed out, the kind of golden visas to wealthy Russians, that they should be rescinded.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an old scheme, which they stopped doing now, but there was a scheme for quite a few years where if you were someone who was willing to invest a lot of money in the UK, it wasn't just Russians, it was people from right the way around the world. If you were willing to invest in British businesses, create jobs here, then you got what was colloquially known as a golden visa. And actually, the idea behind it's not necessarily a stupid one, but what we now need to know is, were any of those visas issued to people who now turn out to be Russian oligarchs, part of Putin's crony set, if I can put it that way? And if they are, and we then put them on the sanctions list, it seems a bit bonkers to leave them with a golden visa to enter the UK or to stay in the UK, because many of them may very well already be living here in posh London flats, in Mayfair and places like that. It seems a bit bonkers to let them stay. So I was really asking the PM, look, if they are on the sanctions list, will you rescind their visas and throw them out?
But you didn't. What reply did you get? It didn't sound like you were going to get that firm commitment.
I thought it was a bit better than you're describing. He basically said we will basically get rid of them one way or another if they are on the sanctions list. So I took that as pretty positive news. We'll have to wait and see once the list starts to grow, which I think it's going to quite soon, once the emergency legislation, which Parliament's been looking at this week, goes through. And we'll have to see, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, I suppose, is the point. But I was reasonably positive about it. He seemed to be saying that they will, although he was a bit vague as to the details. But, I suppose we'll allow him a bit of vagueness on that at this stage.
It is PMQs after all, I suppose. Vagueness being the purpose in many regards. John, let's move on to the situation with Ukrainian refugees. We heard from right across the House, not just from the Lib Dems, SNP, Labour, but also some Conservative MPs too, notably the former Northern Ireland Secretary Julian Smith, asking for the government to have a more humane policy when it comes to Ukrainian refugees. They do seem to have mucked this all up. Is this simply down to bureaucracy, or have they misjudged the public mood when it comes to how welcoming the British people might be to Ukrainian refugees?
I think you're right that the public, and indeed I think government ministers, want to be extremely humane about this. And in fact, what they've announced with schemes which should allow hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians into the country in a variety of different channels and ways is very, very well intentioned and very humane. I think it sounds like it's more of a problem with actually executing the plan. So the plan's good, but a theoretical plan won't get anybody over a border. You've actually got to make it work in practice on the ground when someone presents themselves at an airport or wherever it says, I want to come to the UK. And I think it's a practical problem where we need to just implement the plans, because if they're just on paper, it won't do anybody any good.
Does this put pressure on the Home Secretary? I mean, she's clearly failing, whatever you think about it, to deal with the migrant situation in the Channel. She's not done terribly well with this. She's lost the head of the Metropolitan Police in recent weeks. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's a steady ship, the Home Office, at the moment.
Well, I think to be fair, the head of the Metropolitan Police was pushed out by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, rather than by the Home Secretary. But nonetheless, I mean, you are right to say that there is widespread concern, all the way across the political spectrum, from left to right and back again, to say we've got these plans in place. We've actually now got to deliver them. We've got to do better than this. And I think, to be fair, there is no shortage of willingness and understanding of that on the government benches. I mean, you heard the Prime Minister just in the clip you showed saying that he and a whole number of other very senior cabinet ministers are descended from immigrants themselves, so that they get it. And it's just a question of getting the thing to happen properly and soon.
OK, let's move on to energy supplies and the cost of living crisis. That was the other big issue that dominated PMQs. Let's just have a look back at what was said between the Labour leader and the Prime Minister.
Speaker, the typical energy bill is going up by £700 next month, and that's because of pressures before Russia invaded Ukraine. The Chancellor's solution? A forced £200 loan for every household, paid back in mandatory instalments over 5 years. The big gamble behind that policy was that energy costs would drop quickly after a short spike. That bet now looks certain to fail. When will the Prime Minister force the Chancellor into a U-turn?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the Chancellor, has set out plans to help families with energy costs, with unprecedented measures to abate council tax by £150, Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the other schemes that we are putting forward. And I can tell the House that, yes, he's absolutely right that we need to meet the long-term impacts of the spike in energy prices, and that's why I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply.
That was Prime Minister's question time a little earlier. John, when you look at the reality of all of this, petrol, diesel, maybe going to reach £2 a litre at the pumps, energy bills going up by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Next month, people's taxes going up by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. This is not sustainable. £350 is simply not going to be enough. Something's going to have to give, isn't it?
Well, I think you're right that it's clearly something which is it's already painful for an awful lot of us, and it's going to get more painful. So you're absolutely right to say that it just won't be enough. It won't be good enough for any government anywhere to sort of sit there and do nothing. The thing which I found most important about today's Prime Minister's question was the comment which the Prime Minister made right at the end of the clip that you just played, and which is his point about self-sufficiency plan, because ultimately what's going on here is that, for example, China is trying to wean itself off coal and is starting to import an awful lot more gas from places like Russia, incidentally. That's pushing the price up. Ukrainian crisis on top of that. So yeah, this isn't something which is going to be sort of permanently better quickly. It might spike up and down, but it's not something which is going to sort of be a sort of purely temporary thing. And that means we've got to have a long-term answer, which basically says we're surrounded by windy seas that will provide us with clean, green energy. We can do all sorts of things to wean ourselves off the influence of Russian gas, even if we're not using very much of it ourselves, and cut the costs. And ultimately, that's what we've got to do, not just for motorists and for households, but for businesses too. I mean, it drives up the costs of all our exports.
John, I get that point, but the whole point, that is much more of a medium to long-term answer, isn't it? Like, people need help. Now, I noticed in Ireland today, for example, the Cabinet agreed to cut fuel duty on petrol and diesel essentially by 15 and 20 pence respectively until the end of August. That's an immediate thing that's going to happen from midnight tonight. The petrol and diesel is going to get cheaper, quite substantially, at the pumps. The British government's going to have to act quickly in the next couple of weeks to do something, aren't they?
Well, I think we've got to be a bit careful, because what that does, I mean, the Irish example, what is it life cheaper overall? What it does is shift the cost from your energy bill to your tax bill. You're still paying, in many cases, just as much as you were before. It's just out of a different pocket. The thing that we need to do is to be clear and honest with ourselves that that's what some of these schemes are posing. Is not actually solving the problem; it's just moving things around on the table. And therefore, we've got to longer-term solutions. And otherwise, we're just chasing things around in circles.
OK, John, appreciate your time. A little bit of a dodgy connection over, Paul, but we got every word of it, though. John Penrose there, joining us live from Westminster. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's stay in Parliament and speak to the Labour MP, Bill Esselstyn, who is also joining us down the line. Bill, good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us. Just on that point, I mean, the Labour Party were pushing the line today, weren't they? That this could be paid for by a windfall tax when it comes to energy companies. The Prime Minister, though, seemed to be suggesting that in the end that might actually stifle their ability to try and find new sources of energy, given that they are effectively self-sanctioning themselves from Russian oil and gas.
Well, thanks very much, Darren. It's great to be with you. And we've seen a windfall tax brought in France, where they've managed to keep energy price rises to 4%. We're facing a 54% rise in this country from next month, £700 on average per household. Businesses uncapped, of course, face much bigger rises. And that's why we came forward with a plan for a windfall tax, a one-off windfall tax, with including 600 million, by the way, for the energy intensive sectors. And the big oil and gas companies are making record profits. That's why we know this is doable. They understand that just as much as we do. And I'm afraid the government's approach of giving people loans for £200, facing a £700 rise in energy prices in April, possibly £1,000 or more in October, the way things are going, it just isn't the answer. And that's why Keir Starmer was saying today that the Prime Minister really needs to tell the Chancellor to do a U-turn and to adopt our windfall tax.
OK, Bill, well, let's pause this for a second, because we're going to look back at PMQs and this exchange, if you like, on energy prices, and particularly on Labour's record when it comes to nuclear power.
Protecting energy profits, not working people. Doesn't that say it all? Britain can't afford another crisis like this. We need to improve our long-term energy security. That starts with supporting new nuclear and renewables. But the Conservatives have effectively banned new onshore wind. As a direct result of this short-sighted approach, we're using more gas every year than we import from Russia. That's ludicrous. So will the Prime Minister relax planning laws, end the block on onshore wind, and stop supporting policies that make us so dependent on foreign gas?
Prime
Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to the policies that this government has pursued that we actually only are dependent on Russian gas for 3% of our gas needs, unlike virtually every other European country, Mr. Speaker. It's thanks to the massive investment that we've had in renewables, Mr. Speaker, that we are, as I've said many times in this House, the Saudi Arabia of wind power, producer of more offshore wind than virtually any other country in the world, Mr. Speaker. And I think he just, by the way, I think he just committed to supporting, this may be news to some of his party, but he just committed to supporting more nuclear power. Great news. There is more joy in heaven, Mr. Speaker. There is more joy in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, Mr. Speaker.
So just be clear on this, Bill. I mean, Labour are in favour, and I think Keir Starmer suggests this, they are in favour of expanding our nuclear energy supplies. And also, what's the view on fracking?
Of course, we're in favour of new nuclear, and I mean the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was blaming the last Labour government for the energy crisis that's hitting us now. But they've been in power for 12 years, for goodness sakes, Darren. I mean, it's absurd, and they have delayed the completion of the decision even to start Sizewell C. So a lot of this is caused by a failure to invest in wind, in tidal, in solar, all of which we've been calling for all the way through those last 12 years, by the way, and the delay in making a decision on nuclear. We'd be in a much better place. You made the point earlier, it's long term. Yes, it is, but if we could have been here a lot earlier, and that's why Keir Starmer used this phrase today about a clean energy sprint. That's exactly the right way to go forward. And fracking won't solve the problem. It will take years and years to get that on stream, even if it was desirable. And believe you me, in my constituency, it would be disastrous because we're right on the edge of a potential fracking site. The answer is to support people with their energy bills now, which is what Labour's plan will do. We've put forward a plan to cut VAT on energy bills. That's £200 per person, and to support the 9.3 million households most directly affected with a £400 increase in the warm homes discount. And as I said to you before, £600 million in a fund for the energy-intensive industries. So we've got plans for this. We want the government to adopt them.
Just very finally, Bill, on Ukrainian refugees.
Yeah.
As far as I understand it, the Labour Party aren't opposed to what the government's doing in terms of still insisting that Ukrainian refugees need visas to come into this country. It just seems that you're not terribly happy about how it's being managed, but in principle, you and the government are on the same page.
Well, I don't think we're on the same page at all, Darren. The government have dragged their feet, whether deliberately or through incompetencies for others to judge. My dad's family were persecuted by the Tsar in the early 20th century. They fled Tsarist Russia and were given sanctuary in this country. I compare what happened there. I wouldn't be here now if Britain hadn't been a welcoming home for refugees at that time. And I compare that situation with what's happening now, where people are fleeing, they are traumatised, they are desperate, and they're being turned away at the port of Calais for reasons that are beyond belief. 2 million refugees across Europe. We've taken a few hundred so far. The government needs to turn this around. They need to adopt our plan for emergency visas, which can be processed quickly. All security concerns can be addressed. You know what? The Defence Secretary confirmed that in House of Commons in his statement just this afternoon. He knows it's possible. Priti Patel, for some reason, is dragging her feet. Her department need to shake up. We can't have ministers saying, come here if you want to pick fruit. We need to look after people. We need to have a humanitarian visa, and we need to show the sanctuary that Britain has always offered people in their hour of need.
But you don't want to go as far. You don't want to go as far as the European Union, though, in removing visas altogether. And you've made that point. But of course, there is criticism about the Home Office. Bill, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Bill Esterson. There, joining us from Parliament. Go on, Bill. I know you want to say something. I was just making clear, though, that let's be very clear about that. You are in favour still of that Ukrainian refugees will still need to produce visas to get into this country. That is not the case in the European Union.
We can have emergency visas that are really easily processed. That's what the Defence Secretary said, and we agree with him. for some reason, the Home Secretary doesn't seem to see it that way.
OK. Bill, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there.
Thank you.
Parliament. OK, you're watching GB News, The Briefing, 25 minutes past 3 almost, with a quick break. Coming up next, we're going to be live on the Ukrainian-Polish border with the very latest on the situation on the ground. Stay tuned for that. See you in a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News and The Briefing, coming up to 3:30 on this Wednesday afternoon. Thank you for your company. Now, the mass evacuation of civilians from Ukraine continues following Russia's invasion, with the government trying to evacuate civilians through 6 humanitarian corridors, including from the besieged southern city of Mariupol. Russia says it will observe a regime of silence to allow for people to flee to safety. Meanwhile, the United Nations says more than 2 million refugees has so far fled Ukraine, with over 1 million of those having entered Poland. And joining me now from the Polish-Ukrainian border is our reporter, Bradley Harris. Good afternoon, Bradley. Just brings us up to date with what the situation there is on the ground.
Yeah, well, here I am in Medyka. It's the busiest border crossing between Ukraine and Poland. And you can probably hear the hive of activity around me. Right now, we've got a pickup truck that is on a public path that's collecting all of the rubbish that's left behind from the many clothes, food, bottles of water that have been consumed over the last 40 hours. You can see just in the distance there, that is another coach being filled up with Ukrainian refugees. It is constant here, Darren. Darren. It's not 9 to 5, it's 24 hours a day. Constantly people crossing the border. We know already 2 million people have fled Ukraine, most of them into Poland, over 1.2 million. I'm currently standing in a shelter that was built this morning. I was here this morning when these wooden planks were being put on the floor, and now it's a place to house Ukrainian refugees. 2 people here holding their dogs, because of course many people won't actually leave their homes in Ukraine unless they can take their pets with them. Many people here with dogs, cats, and there is dog food available here for free. It's unbelievable, the support. I cannot stress enough how many people have come here, not just from Poland. I'm talking around the world. I've spoken to people from Spain, from America, from China, from the UK as well. Many people from the UK who have come, driven here 3 days, tops, to get here, to then deliver things like chocolate, clothes. The amount of support is incredible, as right now still Ukrainians still continually come through the border, making their way through now. It looks like chaos behind me, but seriously, it's very organised. It may not look like it, but the Polish government are doing a lot here to help Ukrainians. They are spending a lot of money. 8 billion zloty has been set aside to help the refugee effort. That's about 1.3 billion pounds. So yes, Darren, at the moment still many people fleeing Ukraine as the invasion continues. We're 2 weeks in now, but certainly here there's a lot of support continuing too.
Yeah, incredible efforts on the by the Polish. It all seems terribly well organised, but at the same time, the weather has started to turn a little, hasn't it? It's getting pretty cold, and that is going to make life incredibly more difficult for many of those refugees.
Oh, absolutely, Darren. Yeah, when I arrived here on Sunday, it was bitterly cold then. Now I've got gloves on, a scarf on, because it's hitting -7. Tomorrow, double that. It's going to be really cold. Snowfall again. We saw a lot of that this morning. It's died down a bit now, but when we turned up to Medyka this morning and looked at the piles of clothes that were scattered along the ground, they were covered in snow, and many refugees were coming in, shaking them off and trying to find coats, big jackets, thermal clothing, because of course many refugees here, Darren, are arriving with the clothes they have on their back and literally nothing at all. My cameraman Jose is just going in to the big queue now. You can see people here carrying suitcases. We've got to remember that when Ukrainians have to get up and go, they don't have days to think about what they're packing. They have sometimes minutes. There was a woman called Valerie that I was speaking to just a few hours ago that said when she heard the sirens, she went into her bathroom in Ukraine, and then she heard the shelling. That was the moment where she thought she had to go. 2 children there waving at the camera, smiling, considering the situation that we have between Russia and Ukraine. It's so interesting to see people still smiling and positive. We're being told to move inside now as the truck makes its way out to the main road, Darren. But certainly, as I say, a lot of people supporting Ukrainians as they flee their country.
Yeah, indeed. Very impressive effort on the ground there in Poland. Bradley, thank you so much. Stay warm, stay safe. Bradley Harris there joining us from the Ukrainian-Polish border. Coming up in the next 30 minutes here on The Briefing, we're going to be talking about the impact that these sanctions are having on the Russian economy, what differences they're making to ordinary Russians. Plus, we're going to be speaking to an ex-military commander about what's happening on the ground. Are the Russians really stalled, or are they making progress in different parts of the country? That and so much more in the next 30 minutes. But first, here's the very latest news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 3:34. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, Boris Johnson says the number of Ukrainian refugees coming to the UK will rise very sharply to hundreds of thousands in the coming weeks. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK says his officials will help to deal with the refugees if the visa rules are lifted. But the Prime Minister says we must have to have checks to avoid unnecessary security risks. Well, meanwhile, Downing Street has announced that a new visa processing centre in Lille in France will begin accepting appointments from tomorrow. The loss of power at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine will not have a critical impact on safety. That's according to the United Nations nuclear watchdog. And that statement comes after Ukraine's foreign minister called for an urgent ceasefire to allow power to be restored over fears that the plant risked releasing radiation into the air. Well, Russia seized control of Chernobyl last month. The Labour leader says the Prime Minister cannot blame the UK's rising energy bills on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the Keir Starmer says pressures existed before the conflict. Well, it has UK drivers are hit now by the second largest daily hike in diesel prices for more than 20 years, with an average cost now of a litre at a record 165.2 pence. Experts have warned sanctions on Russian oil will further increase prices at the pump. The UK's promised to phase out the use of Russian oil by the end of this year. The Ukrainian president says his country has shown it will not surrender to Russia. The UK Ministry of Defence says Russian troops have not made any significant breakthroughs as fighting continues to the northwest of the capital. Ukrainian air defences, though, are preventing Russian fighter jets from achieving any degree of control. 4 cities, though, are currently encircled by Russian forces and they continue to suffer heavy shelling. In some other news now, a 28-year-old man has died on Ben Nevis in the Highlands. Police Scotland say it's the 6th fatality in Scotland's mountains over the last 2 weeks. Rescuers work to reach 17 people stranded on the UK's highest mountain. You're now up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Darren will be back briefly with the briefing.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing. GB Views at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. We'll get some of your views later on in the programme about the situation in Ukraine and indeed what the UK government here could be doing to help the cost of living crisis. But first, the Pentagon has dismissed Poland's plan to hand the US its MiG-29 fighter jets, built by the Soviet Union no less, to boost Ukraine's fight against Russia. Washington appeared surprised by the announcement by the Polish foreign minister, who yesterday said that his government was ready to place the MiG jets at the disposal of the United States. But the Pentagon roundly rejected it, saying it raised the prospect of NATO jets being directly involved in a conflict with Russia, something NATO has been very keen to avoid. Well, earlier, the Defence Secretary was in the Commons providing an update.
We have now increased that supply. I can update the House that as of today, we have delivered 3,615 NLAWs and continue to deliver more. We will shortly be starting the delivery of small consignment of anti-tank Javelin missiles as well. I want to assure the House that everything we do is bound by the decision to supply defensive systems and are calibrated not to escalate to a strategic level.
Well, I'd like to say, joining me from Edinburgh now is the former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Stuart, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, if we can, the situation on the ground. We keep talking, don't we, that Russia seems to have stalled in certain areas, that it's not going quite as well as they had hoped, but they are making progress, particularly in the south and the east of the country.
That appears to be the case. I think the consensus is that the Russian plan was initially for a coup de main operation, maybe lasting up to 3 days, when they would just drive into the capital and unseat the government. That clearly did not work in the face of ferocious Ukrainian resistance. And it appears that the Russians, therefore, have run out of logistics, and we can see that, I think, in the convoy to the north of Kiev. There is progress, but it's pretty slow and steady progress. In the south, I think the terrain may be more favourable. I think perhaps they're using different and perhaps professional troops to fight the battle there. But really, we're looking at an operational pause as both sides collect their strength for whatever is going to follow. And I think that next bit is going to be a bit of a slog based around the cities.
Yeah, it does seem that the Russians are going for the age-old tactic of siege, essentially. They are still trying in their attempts, particularly to surround Kiev.
Yes, absolutely. And but nobody wants to fight in an urban environment, because that's probably the most difficult environment for an attacking force to operate. And it's also very heavily predicated in favour of the defending forces, who know the ground, who can prepare the ground, fortify houses, block routes, etc., etc. So I guess the Russians would far rather the cities capitulated, and going in to root out the Ukrainians must be absolutely the last thing that they want to do.
And just in terms of the reaction from the West, it's been pretty united, hasn't it, so far? We saw some splits yesterday, however, with Poland and the United States. When it comes to these MiG jets, it's very clear that the United States feels very uncomfortable about doing something that may well escalate this even further and draw NATO in even further.
Absolutely, and I think every NATO nation is trying desperately to avoid escalation. The Polish offer of MiG-29 jets was very interesting, of course, because MiG-29s are of Russian origin. The Ukrainians have some, and therefore it wouldn't need a huge amount of conversion training for the Ukrainian pilots to fly them. But it seems that for the United States, it's just a step too far. Now, whether that means it's a step too far full stop, or whether it's a step too far at the moment, remains to be seen. But Putin is the bully in the playground. And as we all know, bullies have to be confronted at some point. And there is a strong argument that that should be done sooner rather than later.
And just very finally, Stuart, we keep hearing, don't we, and we keep telling viewers, but probably not explaining it terribly well, what are we sending as a country to Ukraine, and how effective is it being used in the past 2 weeks to target Russia?
Okay, well, basically the three weapon systems that we need to talk about in the aftermath of Ben Wallace's statement. The first is the NLAW, which is next generation light anti-tank weapon, which is a single-shot fire-and-forget weapon that can be operated by one man. It's hugely effective and basically flies itself towards the target, whilst the operator can be doing something else, taking cover or selecting another target. And it's a British manufacturer, and we've had them for a long time, and they appear to be very effective because they attack the top armour of the tanks rather than directly on the thicker armour. We're also supplying a few, and I can't think it'll be more than a couple of hundred Javelin anti-tank missiles, which are slightly different, have got a longer range and are of American manufacture, but they're just as effective and also have a top attack capability. And finally, the Secretary of State mentioned the Starstreak high-velocity missile, which is what we call a MANPAD, handheld anti-aircraft weapons system. The interesting thing about this, and again, it's a British design and manufactured in Belfast, is that it has a speed of approaching Mach 4 on its way to the target. And it isn't actually a missile, it's actually a hitile. It can't be decoyed because it is laser guided and hugely effective. And I think all of those together will have a major impact on the ability of the Ukrainian forces to resist the Russian assault.
Fascinating stuff, Stuart. Thank you so much for breaking that all down. That's Stuart Crawford there, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, former British Army officer. Thank you so much indeed for joining us from Edinburgh. Well, let's move on to the economics of all of this, because yesterday the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, announced that the UK would phase out the import of Russian oil and gas products by the end of this year. Meanwhile, the United States has said it's going to immediately ban Russian oil and gas, the EU vowing to cut it by 2/3 as well this year. It comes as consumer giants, including Starbucks, McDonald's and Coca-Cola, have now joined the growing list of companies halting business in Russia as a result of the invasion in Ukraine. Well, delighted to say joining me in the studio is our economics editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, on the businesses pulling out, how much of an impact does that really have, in the sense, I assume the economic immediate impact is it's pretty limited, but it sends a really symbolic message, doesn't it, if you can't buy your McDonald's or your Burger Kings and buy your Coca-Cola?
I was knocking around in Moscow when the first McDonald's opened back in 1990. Coca-Cola and Pepsi, they've been in Russia since Soviet days, since the 1950s, respectively. So it is quite a big deal. You've got lots of companies like Shell and BP that have invested hugely in post-Soviet Russia. You've got VW with lots of factories, Siemens, Samsung, consumer goods giants like Procter & Gamble and Unilever, and they're all now rushing for the door. I don't think this is the end of Western businesses in Russia. I think a lot of those plants will be mothballed. I don't think we're going to be ripping up the Nord Stream pipeline that goes from northern Russia to the German coast under the Baltic Sea anytime soon. But certainly these assets are being frozen. Some of them will be sold. I do believe that BP and Shell will sell their huge stakes in various Russian oil and gas projects, not least in the Far East. But I think a lot of businesses are trying to distance themselves, understandably, rightly so, from Russia, given this aggressive invasion of Ukraine.
Now, we're looking at pictures, aren't we, here of oil being extracted out of the ground. Big announcements yesterday. Probably didn't go quite as far as some would hope, but still quite significant. But in the end, bottom line is, this means even higher energy prices for you, everyone else in the country. Keir Starmer hammering the Prime Minister on this today. Prime Minister reasonably have batted it away, but this issue is not going to go away. The government's going to have to do an awful lot more. And I remarked earlier on about how the Irish government today decided to immediately cut duty on petrol and diesel, quite a significant amount as well, until the end of August. There is a sense that this mini budget is going to turn into quite a significant political moment, because the government's going to have to do a heck of a lot.
Yeah, it's a spring statement, isn't it, on the 23rd of March, and it will turn out to be a kind of wartime budget, if you like, because there is economic war between Russia and the West. Or there aren't boots on the ground from the US and the UK in Ukraine. I don't think there'll be a no-fly zone enforced by NATO anytime soon, but there is economic conflict. And even during the Soviet era, we didn't have embargoes on oil and gas from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was always a reliable supplier of Western gas. We're now much, much more dependent on Russian oil and gas, particularly in the EU, particularly Germany, famously. And this is playing havoc on global markets. Before this invasion, the average price of a litre of oil and gas across the UK was £1.47 a litre. It's now well above £1.60. We're seeing £1.90 in some parts of the UK at the moment, and £2 a litre is clearly going to happen. And those household utility bills, before this invasion, we already knew post-pandemic that there was going to be a big increase in those gas bills and utility bills coming in for households in April, Ofgem raising the energy price cap, as we've often discussed, down from about £1,300 a year to almost £2,000 a year, a big increase. If you look at wholesale gas prices now, 16 times higher than they were this time last year, not least due to the turmoil on markets because of this tit-for-tat energy embargo that's happening. then that energy price cap for ordinary households is going to go even higher. Also, and we don't say this often, the energy costs for businesses. Lots of our energy-intensive businesses are steel makers that still employ over 30,000 people, are manufacturers that employ thousands of people, often across those Labour red wall seats that are now Conservative. Those businesses are going to come under threat.
And it'll have a knock-on as well, in addition to consumers as well. 16 a credible statistic. Liam, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Liam Halligan, our economics editor. Well, let's now bring in Jake Cordell. He's a journalist for the Moscow Times, who's actually recently just left, essentially fled Russia. Jake, just give us a sense of what's happened in the last couple of days to you and why you felt the need to get out of Moscow.
Yeah, sure. I think the situation in Russia has deteriorated domestically very rapidly, much more rapidly than people were expecting. And we heard about all the businesses fleeing and this return to the 1990s or even some darker days in the Soviet Union. That's definitely the feeling domestically. So in the last week, Russia has closed down basically every single independent Russian media outlet that existed, basically forcing their journalists to decide do they want to quit journalism or move abroad. And crucially for the journalist picture inside Russia, Russia passed a law last Friday which basically threatens 15 years imprisonment for anybody who reports on the war using non-official sources. So that's anything that comes from anybody other than a Russian official. And as we know, Russian officials are not giving anywhere near the full or accurate picture of what's going on the ground in Ukraine. So many journalists, mainly Russian colleagues, but also foreign correspondents, were faced with the decision of, if we stay in Russia and carry on reporting on this war accurately, perhaps we could be liable to criminal prosecution. So many, it's definitely for the Russian colleagues, decided to leave and carry on their reporting abroad outside the reach of Russia's increasingly repressive laws.
And Jake, what is the sense of public opinion there? I know these things are very difficult to judge. Also, particularly when you're in Moscow and St. Petersburg, because Russia is not just simply those two, in many ways, Western cities. What is your sense of what the public mood is in terms of backing for this war?
Indeed, that's a very important caveat, like you say. On the ground in Moscow and St. Petersburg, we see the pictures of protests. I think more than 10,000 people have been arrested since the war started, anti-war protests. Protesting, of course, is illegal in Russia. And when you're walking around the cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg, you're seeing these closed shops. You're seeing Western brands that used to have flagship shops in the center of the city gone. You're seeing really big queues at banks as people line up to get their money. You're seeing the first days of economic crisis and international isolation. Outside those cities is a very different picture. 2/3 of Russians rely on state TV for their information. So they're getting this very warped sense of what's going on. Moreover, they already held very anti-Western views. And before the invasion, they blamed the West predominantly for the aggravation of the situation around Ukraine. Just 4% of Russians said the Kremlin was to blame for the aggravation. Now, if they're seeing this propaganda day in, day out, their views may even becoming hardened. They may be seeing these sanctions, which is part of the Russian propaganda. They talk up every single sanction and use it as part of the West's campaign against Russia. So potentially, the majority of the Russian population are becoming perhaps more ingrained in their anti-West sentiment. However, as the economic crisis builds, as prices go up quite rapidly in shops, as people can't afford their foreign holidays or even their travel around the country, it will be interesting to see whether that blame stays directed at the evil West in Washington and London, or whether people start to look a bit closer to home at the Kremlin and say that they should have done something a bit differently.
Fascinating stuff, Jake. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. That's Jake Cordell there, who works for the Moscow Times. Recently left Moscow, though, given the introduction of that law last week. Thank you, Jake, for joining us indeed. Let's move on to focus very quickly and briefly, unfortunately, because we haven't got much time, on China, its role potentially on all of this. Is it going to be a peacemaker? Well, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown is a Conservative MP and joins us from Westminster. Really apologies, so, Jeff, we haven't got much time, but just explain to us China's role in all of this. Xi Jinping essentially trying to suggest that he wants to help. Is China genuine in those efforts?
Well, I've been involved with China for about 25 years, and it's always very difficult to know exactly what China's thinking is. And I think at the moment, it's very unclear as to whether they are criticizing the Americans and ourselves in the West for what's going on in Russia, or whether they genuinely want to help. One minute they're criticizing us for having imposed sanctions. The next minute there's a suggestion that they might want to try and mediate. So I think it's very difficult to know what's going on indeed. But I can say this, with all my long dealings of China, they are very pragmatic. And I think they will not want to see a shrinking of the world economy, because that will affect their own economy and their own people's wealth. So I suspect they will want to try and come in at some stage to try and resolve this situation, but it may not be just yet.
But can China be an honest actor in this, given the fact they say Russia is a strategic special partner, and that they may well have known about this invasion before it happens?
Well, I think whether they did or whether they didn't, I think it's very difficult to know. But I think anybody who can bring any pressure on Putin to try and cease hostilities would be welcome, really, frankly. So if they can do that, yes, I think that would be helpful.
We're going to have to leave it there. We will get you back on again, though, to talk about this in more detail. We've just run out of time, as always, the way. Sir Geoffrey, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Sir Geoffrey Clifford.
All right, thank you.
From Westminster, thank you indeed. OK, well, that is it for today, I'm afraid. As I say, we have run out of road. I'll be back at 3 tomorrow. Tom is at 9:30, Gloria at 12. Up next, though, the awesome, amazing Colin Brazier is across the studio from me, primed and ready to go between 4 and 6. But first, let's bring you the weather from the Met Office. See you tomorrow.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a wet and windy start to the day for much of Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and there'll continue to be spells of rain in the west through the rest of the day. But the winds are coming down and the rain will also ease overnight. Weather fronts are pushing in ever so slowly from the west. The squeeze in the isobars ahead of these weather fronts has brought some gales to Western Scotland, Northern Ireland earlier in the day. But through the evening and overnight, the winds ease. The rain also tends to peter out, but it will still be raining with some hill snow for the mountains of Scotland there, and the rain extending into parts of Wales and the southwest through the night. Clear spells ahead of that for central and eastern England, as well as the northwest. And it's in the northwest behind the front where a touch of frost is possible, 2 to 4 Celsius generally, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, but a milder start elsewhere because of the cloud, because of those outbreaks of rain. And the rain continues for some time across much of Scotland, northern England during Thursday morning. Brighter skies for a time for Wales and southern and central England, but further showers will come along later on. And it's mild once again, 14 Celsius in the southeast, a bit colder further northwest, 9 or 10 Celsius for Belfast and Glasgow. Into Thursday evening, drier and clearer for a time for Scotland, Northern England, but further cloud and outbreaks of rain or showers move up from the south. And so that by the early hours, for most, it's generally cloudy. There'll be on and off rain at times, and the breeze will be picking up. So a mild night, a frost-free night for most, with temperatures dipping to 7 to 9 Celsius generally. Then we start off Friday with that breeze, with further spells of rain pushing into southwest England, reaching Wales, central southern England during the morning. That breaks up into showers, so Friday afternoon generally is a showery picture for much of the UK. A lot of cloud in the sky. The showers ease on Saturday, but further rain on Sunday.